Hey everybody, welcome to my video on my 1999 VFR800, otherwise known as RC46, or in the States as the Interceptor. While it was in its infancy, all the magazines used to cover this bike, and it's been described many times as the best all-round motorcycle in the world ever made. I wouldn't argue with that point. It's a very, very good solid bike, ultra reliable, which comes from the motor, which is a V4 90 degree V4, 781cc, fuel injected, and it can trace its origins back to the racing engine from the RC45. Take a couple of minutes to tell you about my ownership experience. I've had this bike for a couple of years, and how I bought it, the mistakes I made when buying it, and the work that I've carried out since. When I bought this bike, I bought it on condition from a guy who had it, well, he'd owned it for about 8 years, and had a full stamped up service history, so I didn't bother test riding it. Never do that. Always take a bike out for a test drive. It was on the way home, I noticed a couple of things, and I thought, well, okay, maybe I could have got the price down a little bit, but you live and learn. So on the way home, I noticed that the front brake lever was pulsing, which immediately told me that the discs were warped, and when you did brake, you could feel the head bearings or the steering bearings were clonking. So I thought, well, I'm going to have to get in there and sort those out. I'd only had the bike a week, and I'd ridden it a couple of times before I put it up on the table here to actually do the work required. I walked in one morning, and I happened to look just in front of the rear tyre on the table, and there was a pool of oil under it. And I immediately looked up into the back cylinders, you know, with the worst feeling, thinking, you know, has the motor let go? Has there been some catastrophic failure? And as I looked underneath, I could see that the suspension linkages were covered in oil, and the bottom of the shock was covered in oil. And the bike had been sat around for so long that I think the seal had dried out. The shock was 14, 15 years old. The bike had only covered, when I got it, just shy of just over 15,000 miles. It's now just turned 17,000 miles. I couldn't put it to much use last year because I had a back injury. I had to have some surgery on my spine, so I'm looking to change that this year and put plenty of miles on. But anyway, that necessitated me replacing the rear shock, which I did with a basic nitron shock. It was a great improvement, really good service, and a nightmare of a fit. And while I was in there, I did another job as well. These have got steel, plain steel or painted steel header pipes, and they're renowned for rotting. So I replaced those as well with some Motad stainless steel headers. So as you can see, I'm into this bike quite a long way now. The list is growing. So I'll take you through some of the other things as well. These have a reputation for frying their regulator rectifiers. So while I had the bike in pieces, I had a look at the wiring, and I could see that the connector was already going slightly brown colour. So I replaced the regulator rectifier as before it broke, because it was on a standard one, and I bought a MOSFET regulator rectifier, which supposedly cures the whole thing. I know people have put fans from computers on the regulator rectifier to improve the airflow over them so they don't, you know, get over hot. But so far so good. So far so good. Now, some of the other things I did. The pair valve system on these, which introduces, by way of some sort of emissions measures, it introduces on a closed throttle, I believe. There's a little solenoid, and it allows fresh air to come from the airbox into the exhaust ports and gives like a secondary burn. So I went ahead and got rid of that. There's an awful lot of plumbing and wiring and everything up inside, and when you do check the exhaust emissions with these, or you do any tuning work, you have to blank off the pair valve because it throws all the O2 reading. It throws that off. So I made some aluminium, about 3 or 4 millimeter aluminium plate, and I replaced the pair valve housing and got rid of all the hosing and the wiring, and it's cleaned up the engine bay considerably. To do that, you have to take lift the tank and get into all the places you need to get to do that. But then I realised that the engine wasn't coming up to temperature quick enough, and the temperature wasn't getting to where it should be, the normal running temperature. So that led me to believe that the thermostat was stuck open. So I did that as well. So that's fairing off, tank, throttle bodies all off, because the thermostat sits way down inside between the V of the cylinders, and yeah, that's a nightmare of a job. It's a common problem, but I've done it now, so I know that it's good. So the coolant is all replaced. So over a period of a few months, all these jobs got done. So the bike is in a really good state of repair now. Early last summer, I took the swinging arm off. It's a single-sided swinging arm. So I thought, well, it's 16 years old. All the bearings in there will probably need grease or re-greasing or just inspecting. So it looks bad, but it's a really quite a simple job to do. So rear wheel out, the final drive all disassembled, and the arm came out really easily. It makes it a lot easier, because this bike doesn't seem to have been ridden in the winter, so there's no salt corrosion or anything like that. It's been really well treated, so that made my life easy. And the swinging arm came out really easy. Everything was nice and clean. Re-greased up all the old bearings, and they were fairly dry actually, as were the steering head bearings before I replaced them. Went back together, and now I know the back end of the bike is all sorted. This has had I put this out onto a page, and I got really mixed results back, some really negative feedback. But I looked at the brake hoses in this, and I figured, well, they're 16 years old as well, and I thought, well, have a look at the replacement kits, and people like Goodrich and Hell were doing kits, and they were, you know, £300. It's like $450–500 US, and I had a look on VFR World at a guy who had delinked the braking system on his VFR. So I had a good look at that, and I thought, well, I'm going to do that. So I took out all the link braking system is now gone. That was quite a job, and produced quite a lot of steel hoses and rubber hoses and all the compensating valves and all that sort of thing. And I ended up with this arrangement here that you see, and it's become quite an international bike. These fork sliders come off a Honda Firestorm, the VTR800. These came from Latvia, so they've done some travelling. And the brakes, the calipers, and the master and the reservoir are off a VTR1000 SP2, and these little puppies came from California. So they've been a fair distance as well. And using this guy as a guide, I carried out the delinking of the brakes, and using all these parts that make the bike look very stock. But it did require some tricky modifications. This bottom lug here, for clearance of the caliper, I had to take about 1.5mm of metal away. But luckily there's a lot of metal, there's a lot of material there. So I just, I took my time, I kept the radius right, and just filed off the metal, so I could run a feeler gauge around there and knew that there was clearance between the caliper and the mounting lug here. So that was all good. The other thing that doesn't fit once you've done that is this is the stock front mudguard, the front fender. And what I had to do is, I'll show you this in maybe a more detailed video, is I had to put some mounting lugs under here. I made a new hole. This is just now a dummy, and because I had to drill a hole here, necessitated me having to respray the mudguard. My first spray job, it didn't come up too bad, but I don't think there's enough lacquer on there, so I'm going to flat that back in the summer months, and I'm going to put some lacquer on there. But the paint was easy enough to get hold of, and yeah, it didn't come out too bad, so I'm quite pleased with that. The other things you may notice, the brake discs aren't standard. These are EBC rotors. These are just a replacement EBC disc. The Honda ones were a lot more expensive, so I went with that, and brand new EBC pads. So that's all good. Okay, I'll do another part of this and we'll go around the bike and maybe show you some things in detail. Okay, hope you enjoyed it and I'll see you again.